everyone. Welcome to Life at ADP, the podcast. This is Kate. You may notice that today's episode, our format is a little bit different, and that's because our dear Ingrid is out on some much well-deserved PTO. So I'm taking the opportunity to sit down and have a one-on-one chat with our guest today. So let's jump right in because we have a ton to cover. Everyone, please welcome Isabel Espina to the podcast. Isabel is Vice President of Product Development for our technology division here, and she is based out of Manhattan. So Isabel, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
So, obviously you're an executive women in tech, which is amazing, a diverse woman. What are some things that you'd like to lean into and share with candidates and people about working at ADP?
One thing I would say that I love about ADP is that I think the culture is extremely welcoming to diversity, right? So one of the things that I'm very passionate about is with these BRGs, like, they're that, intersectional piece, right? Like I'm what are all my hats? Well, I'm a technologist, sure. I'm a woman, I'm a leader, I'm a Latina, etc. So, how do we bring all this together? And, I do love that I feel that ADP really embraces our diversity. And like, even for me, and I make mention of Carlos, but, like I remember for like, my family even like, oh my God, like, a CEO of a Fortune 500 company is an immigrant just like me, like born in Cuba, immigrated to this country, like, rose to such high levels. So I think the company embraces diversity and allows us to be ourselves. We can bring to the table who we are, and that's embraced, right? So I think that's I think our culture, ADP's culture, truly embraces, everybody talks about D&I. I feel like it's authentic. Diversity is the fabric of our culture at ADP. Starts at the executive levels. And, we bid farewell to our CEO, Carlos Rodriguez, also a Cuban immigrant. Like I could look in the organization and I'm represented. There's a woman CEO, there was a Cuban immigrant CEO. Like, I'm like, whoa, like I too can, rise to ranks and whatnot. So then when we say our culture and makeup is one that embraces diversity, we see it in action, then, weave that into our products. We thrive when our products mirror the diversity of our consumers, right? And obviously, our population is very, diverse, and how important it is to ensure that we all are in tune to those different facets so that we can, build products that resonate with our customers. And then really it's like, how do I, as a Latina technologist, ensure that, my community is aware of what all it is to be an engineer, like, what are all the possibilities, what is all the potential, right? Because, the Latinx demographic in this country is huge, and many come, with the immigrant parents that maybe don't speak the language, and like being able to tap into that young community is something that I'm definitely passionate about. And I know like a couple of years ago, I did this fireside chat for Adelante during Hispanic Heritage Month. And like, that sort of like reminded me, like, wait a minute, like, it's always like, women in tech. And I'm like, wait a minute, like I'm forgetting about my peeps. You know what I mean? Like, there's such a small representation of Latinx and, people from that pocket is not well represented in technology at all, even way worse than women. What can I do to help instruct, educate, mentor, inspire, you name it, right? So to me, when I think of Hispanic heritage, I think about how we can bring in diversity, because, diversity, even in the Latinx community, there's so many different cultures, right? So it's a very, very diverse community, right? And like, how do you, ensure that you tap into that for different ideas, innovation, representation for customers, right?
If you don't mind me asking, Isabel, what is the intersectionality of Latinos in tech? Like, what I know underrepresented, but how are technology careers perceived in the Latinx community? Is it something that's esteemed? Is it something that, you know, perhaps young technologists need some guidance in how to talk to their parents for support in joining a career in tech?
I think it's probably just similar, just tech in general, right? Where I think tech is a little bit of, we all use tech, like in, all demographics, whether you speak English or not, who doesn't have a mobile phone and all that. But I think that, and again, I don't think it's unique to the Latinx community. It's really understanding, like, what does it mean, like, what are the various careers, right? And like, I think we all imagine, tech is like IT support, or tech means that I'm coding, and that job sounds really boring. Like I sit there with some like screen and a bunch of, like when you just like the visual, like that's not like, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't think if you would have shown me that, like when I was in high school, I don't want to do that. Like, you know what I mean? So, like, how do you instruct people that there are so many different facets to technology? Like, it's like building a house, right? That like,
I love that
concept of like, what I want to do. And then like there's all these layers and all these different skills, right? There's electricians and plumbers and, people who put a foundation, right? There's an architect, there's a general contractor, and that's how we build software. But nobody really, that's something that people don't really understand unless that's what you do for a living.
Yeah.
So I think if you start, just educating people on, when we say technology, it's not like, sitting behind a computer all day, just, like writing this text, this like voodoo language that spits out stuff, and that like there's, design and thinking about like processes and how do you I mean, there's so much to it. And I think that's why, there is so little talent. So, how many kids, I don't know, like my son is senior now, that you talk to these kids, like so few of them will tell you that they want to go into that, because it's a little bit of like, I don't think people understand it well enough to know what all the jobs are. Like people just think, oh, it's coding. It's coding. Well, I don't really like coding. And they don't think about like coding is almost like I'm putting like the nails on the wall. There's a lot of like conceptualization and solving hard problems and like understanding like almost the ergonomic, like, how does a user interact? Like how can it be like a smooth experience? How can I make it really easy? How can I like understand data and give you information, right? Like, so when I think of the and it's not only in the Latin community and underrepresented, right? And they are even more at a disadvantage, right? Because they don't have, all these like, ability to speak to folks that have a variety of jobs, right? Their networks are smaller, right? So it's really like information, like that sort of information they don't have. So they don't really understand that. I think they all understand that getting an education is really important. They know that education is key, but this is almost like, let me explain to you, like, there's like doctor, nurse, lawyer, like everybody understands, right? I know exactly what that job is, right?
Yes.
Engineer, like, I don't know, like, tell me more, right? And like, then you think engineer, okay, it's like a civil engineer, you design bridges, okay. But like, you know what I mean? When you get more nuance, like I think people start like, I don't even know, like, what job would you do? Like, what does that even mean? Or like, okay, computer scientist. Well, I don't want to just sit and write code. But some people do, but there's so many other jobs within tech that are not just sitting there like spitting out code. Although sometimes the code is the hammer, right? It's not like the thing you're creating, but like it's the hammer. It's like that's just the means to do this, but what I'm excited about is the thing I'm creating, you know? So like
Yep. When you press that button, then it all comes together. And then
then it's like magical, like, oh my God, you know? And then all of a sudden, like, okay, yeah, I do want to code because actually that's pretty cool. That's like using a hammer. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So like that's the thing that I think needs, you know, again, not just for Latinx, just in general, for like young people to understand and demystify, you know, what that means and all the jobs and all the opportunities there are within like, let's say STEM. So that's like from the angle of inspiring young people. And then I guess on the other side is like, you know, our clients are very diverse, right? Our clients, you know, there's a huge population that represent the Latin community. So, you know, bringing folks in that understand what are the needs of that community or what resonates in that community or et cetera is only lets us serve them better.
So let's talk about inspiration. What would your advice be for someone considering a career in technology? What are some things that they should think about? And also, what will keep them moving forward?
I think, first of all, to not be afraid to move around and experiment with things that maybe they have some interest, but they don't have expertise or don't know enough about. Because I think one of the beauties of technology, right, is that it's like you're a lifelong learner, right? You'll never know everything you need to know to do the job because, you know, the job is constantly changing underneath you, right? That's the technology is constantly evolving and changing. So, you know, don't be afraid to experiment, be curious. I mean, that to me is critical. I would say also it's really important to maintain a network.
That's a great one.
Yeah, maintain you know, a professional network, almost like a network of folks that, you know, have a specialty in some area that you're interested, like say technology, but also have a network of folks that can help you navigate the professional world, not just the, you know, how do I solve this hard technical problem, but, you know, how do I navigate an organization, or, you know, how do I establish relationships that in those relationships I'll learn about a different part of the organization or maybe a different technology or something, some nugget that will be, you know, that will help drive my career, right? So it's very important to be to nurture a network. I think also one of the things with like folks younger as a result of COVID, right, is that they don't want to, you know, they don't want to come into the office. They want to be comfortable. They want to work from home. I mean, yeah, flexibility is great, but in order to be able to move, meeting people, letting them know you like in 3D is really important. And, you know, establishing those relationships, you will get nuggets of information that are really hard to establish in, you know, in a WebEx, because in a WebEx, you have to know, who do I set up time with on their calendar? I'm not going to bump into them at the coffee station.
I love that. So we heard that a lot from our interns too, Isabel, just so you know. Like I think we're seeing a really interesting shift. I think there's a small portion of younger talent that like being home because they just like to be home. I think there's people who genuinely like being in the office and meeting. That demographic. Like every intern that I spoke to on site in Alpharetta, they were ecstatic to be in the office. And I don't think they were just saying that. Like every time I'd see them in the hall, you know, this guy Owen, he'd always say, "Hey Kate, what's going on? I'm running to a meeting." Like they thrive off that. And so, you know, I wonder if we're kind of going back to that side. And I'll say, like, I was in the office Monday, Tuesday, I'll be in tomorrow and Friday. You know, I love seeing people. You know, it helps what you're doing. It really, 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 really does. I love that you brought that up too. And it's really interesting to hear that from a senior leader, and then also having heard it from our interns. Like, talk about a spectrum of where people are in their careers. you know?
I think though that it's where I'm seeing it's a little dicey is
Hmm.
like in the middle. I think
Yep.
with folks that have younger children, and I think during pandemic they were all had no choice but to figure out like a different model for childcare.
Yeah.
And I think that now coming back to the office is extremely challenging, right? Because we were able to like sort of manage it better than back in the day where you had to punch the clock, you know what I mean? Like 5 days a
Yeah.
week, you had to have that childcare. And now it's a different model. You have more time with your child. Also, you can kind of juggle both, and they don't want to come back, right? Like that. Like I
Yeah.
that's the middle demographic that I see, and I understand that. I totally understand, and it's a little ironic, right? Because in technology, that's the beauty of you. We've had that flexibility, that remote
Yeah.
ability before anybody else did, right? It's interesting, but I think, yeah, for young folks, definitely, like you got to get in there. You got to meet people, let them see you in 3D. Another piece of advice, I find that folks younger in the career get very anxious about the moving up, like, okay, I'm going to become a manager. I'm like, you need to kind of like try different things, get your, you know, get that not build up that knowledge before you jump to be a manager, because I think that often stifles people. Like then you get stuck at this like, low level manager, and then it's really hard to move up, right? If you jump too quickly into that. So like I feel
Hmm.
like another thing is like make sure that you build up, try different things and not be so quick to like, okay, like if I become a manager, that's a way to grow, but like really grow your knowledge and experiment in different areas and find what you're passionate about versus chasing like a title or a name. Find what you love to do, and the
Yep.
title and the name will follow. So I think that's also pretty important, right? To make sure that that you listen to your gut, and that what that you're doing something that really energizes you, that you love that. So I guess that would be another thing.
I think that's a great piece of advice, and I have yet to ever hear someone share that, quite frankly. So I also find that to be a unique piece of advice, and it makes sense. And I think that's a really important message.
100%.
I love that.
Yeah, no, I think that's 100%. And then I think then we could add to that even that there are multiple paths, right? So like at
Hmm.
ADP, thankfully, we've elongated the technologist path, but you can grow in the path that suits you the best, right? So like I'm somebody who have had a very long, very long in the tooth, so I've been around for a long time, and I was a technologist for a long time. That's what drove me, energized me, I was excited about. And then at a certain point, I decided that I had different interests. Like I wanted to drive change. And that's when I
Mm.
started to say, oh, okay, to drive change, I need, authority, I need budget, I need influence, right? And I wasn't, I had done a lot in like deep in the weeds of the technology, and that wasn't what was driving me anymore. Like I sort of like I was like, okay, I've done that. Like
Hmm.
now what I'm looking for is more, a change maker, let's say. And then I switched into a leadership role, right? That's like you shouldn't follow a prescribed journey. We all have our own journeys, and
Mm.
you should very much follow your passion and try different roles. And often getting those experiences in different roles, that may not be the role, but it helps shape. It's like a step in the journey of like where you're going, right? It'll help
Hmm.
drive that.
I had a question in regards to that, Isabel, if you don't mind. How did
Sure.
you bring your people leaders along on that journey of change with you? How did you get internal support to try something new?
To switch lanes, as it were.
Yep.
So at the time I was working for Roberto, and I basically shared with him, and I mean, I hadn't just like, I had already been in that team, like, I want to say 5 or 6 years, right? So it wasn't like I just got here and whatever, so I think I had contributed a lot to him. I knew that I had support from him. He, like it's almost like I had already done a lot for him, and I felt like I could be honest to say, like, I love it here. But like, I wanted a change. Like, I felt like if I stayed there forever, then I wasn't going to grow. Right. And I think that may be another piece of advice, to not get too comfortable. But so I went to him. I was very honest, and he was supportive. So I was fortunate that he was supportive. He was a sponsor for me. Like in those, and having a sponsor is definitely super important.
Absolutely. The person who's going to mention your name when you're not in the room.
Yeah. So that's key. And thanks to his sponsorship, I was able to, make that big shift, in my career. The other thing also, we talked about like networking, but there's also creating almost, they call it a personal board of directors, right? Where you have folks internal and external, right? That know you very well, that you can be vulnerable with them, right? And very honest with them, and they can help guide you everything from, dealing with difficult personalities, or, how to navigate an org, or maybe this job isn't a right fit for you. And just like, helping you navigate that. Or I'm at a point in my life where, I want to focus more on family. Like, what should I do? But I don't want to lose my career or my footing there. Like, how do I navigate that? Right. So you need like people, again, a diverse, call it board, right? You should have women and men and leaders, and not, like, so it's really important to build that board so you can get these different almost advisors, and you listen, right? That's not like you do what they say, but it helps, inform, and helps you create, make a decision on where do I go next, right? But it's important to have those folks that you can, run things by them, get their advice, that kind of thing. So I think that personal board is really important to have. I would also say to not be afraid to reach out to somebody. Like I've done that a few times, just, leaders in the organization that I had, admired them from afar, their leadership style, their success, something about them that I was like, I would love to have, some time with so-and-so, right? And not being afraid to ask them for a cup of coffee or whatever, 30 minutes to pick their brain a little bit. And, I don't think I've ever been turned down. Usually folks are very gracious. Obviously, you have to be very thoughtful about using their time and, coming to the table with very specific questions and whatnot. But I think that, that's always, been very fruitful. I've always learned something, like taking a nugget, like an important nugget of wisdom, and then you synthesize it into your wisdom, or, but I think those are also things that are important.
And what's an interesting pin beneath everything that you're saying, even as you're talking about with Roberto and the board of directors, and I'm sure like your personal board of directors aren't people that are just in ADP. However, I would also say that you absolutely probably have a board of directors of people who are in ADP because they know intimately some of these players, right? Yes. So that also helps some of the street cred when you're like, hey, how would I manage this situation? Or, hey, what's next for me? But I would say what's great about that is that ADP also fosters those sorts of relationships. Exactly. Right? So whereas you have felt like you've been able to ask Roberto and, you built your street cred with him and you proved yourself with him, what an amazing leader to want what's next for you too. And say, man, I'm going to miss you, right?
Yeah.
But this is right for
But I
you.
get it.
Figure it out, right?
Yeah.
If you want to come back, open door, but
Yeah.
you need this for you. And that's so important too, because I don't think every place is really like that.
That 100%, absolutely. So that's a very big deal. Yeah, it's both. It's like, you know, having you asking, right, but also like the fact that the leaders are receptive and you know they want folks to grow. The other thing is to not be afraid to ask for what you want. You may not get it,
Sure.
but I think that it's important to ask for what you want and to advocate for yourself, like not like sit sort of waiting for, you know, people to drive your career. Like you need to take the driver's seat and have agency on like this is what I want. And again, they may say no, but I think it's always important that they listen to that because it may inform, like you may not get it now, you might get it later. You know, people will understand you better versus just sort of like waiting for somebody to like, you know, magically move you along. Like I've never seen that. Maybe some people have, but I've never seen that. I think usually it's
right.
Everything that I've gotten, I've asked, I want this. And I've been fortunate that many of those wants, you know, I've gotten like when I asked Roberto, listen, I love the lab is amazing, but I want, you know, I want to move on. This is why. And, you know, okay. Or, you know, when I went to, when I was leading enterprise architecture, I said, this gig has been amazing, but I want to lead a product team. I think that's what I'm thinking about is the next step of, you know, to round out my career. I said, I also want to go because I don't feel like I'm equipped in some ways to do the job of, you know, I've been a technologist, but I'm not well versed in the whole business side of the house, strategy, all that. I want to go back to school. Will you be supportive of me to like, you know, like obviously it was like time commitment. Will you recommend me? Blah. And he was like, yeah, but like, again, these were all things that like I asked for, right? So you have to definitely have to ask of what you want. And then I think the other thing is you have to be awesome, you know, and be awesome. I'm not saying that I'm awesome, but like, you know, you have to earn the street creds, as you said, right? And like, and if you're awesome, then that opens doors, right? And people hear about you. So that's important. Which also goes to like sitting in the same role for a very long time isn't good, right? You need to move around because otherwise, no, you know, you don't have the opportunity for other folks to know about your awesomeness. So,
yes.
You know, so that I think is also important.
Isabel, if you don't mind, I'd love to, you know, as you're talking about, you know, asking, right? And you've gotten where you are because you've said, here's where I want to go. I'd love your help in that, right? I think you probably had a very tactful way of not being like, well, I want to be a manager. You know, there's a way to go about things, right? And it's really about building a partnership so that you're raising your hand, but you're also asking for guidance respectfully. I find that a lot of times women in business don't know how to ask for these things, whether it's raising their hand, whether it's asking for more money at an offer, whether it's whatever it may be, because it feels we've been told to be nice, right? And so when it translates into the working world, we tend to kind of shadow. What would be your advice for women in the workforce, you know, in getting their asks heard?
So I think that what's important is really to state your case as to why does that make sense, right? It's not just like just because or because I've been here for a long time or because, you know, almost like pitch yourself as like, you know, I've achieved XYZ. I can bring more to the table. I want to learn and grow. And, you know, like, you know, when I pitched going to a product development organization, I'm energized by the creation process and bringing things to clients, to users. I love that. I want to help build and drive, a business. I don't think it's not just like you go and ask, like you have to come to the table with the street creds, and then you have to articulate what you want. And often that's another thing that, sometimes it's hard. And that's why that personal board of directors often helps us be able to figure out what is it that you want. Because often folks come and like, well, I just want to grow, well, like, what does that mean? I can't help you. You know what I mean? Like what exactly do you mean? Or, well, what are you passionate about? Like, is that really what you want to do? Right? Like, helping you tease that out, and then coming. And when you ask for something, you know exactly what you want, and it's a lot easier to help somebody when you know exactly what they're asking for. But if you come with like a very vague and like, oh, like I just want to grow and I've been here too long, and then it's kind of like I don't know what to tell you. Like, you know what I mean? Now I have to figure out like where would I, that's not a compelling story. The other hand, if I come and I say, listen, this is what I've done, and this is where I want to go, this is what I want, that's a different story. And again, you don't always get what you want.
Sure.
But it's good to have the conversation, right? To have that like dialogue so that they can maybe like make a mental note and say, okay, I can't really do that right now, but I'm going to think about it. Or I'm going to say, you know what, that's amazing. And this is what I think you need to work on to get there, right? Because that could also be the conversation, right? And that's okay, right? And I think we also need to be willing to hear that. And like, okay, well, how help me, like, what would you recommend that I do so that I can build that that muscle? Do you have any recommendations or somebody I should talk to, or having it be like we're both sort of collaborating, like partnering, as you mentioned. Like I want to, I'm asking for your help. How do I grow? We don't always have a receptive leader. You might have somebody that's like, no, like, or, I've seen a lot also where folks are like, oh, this is my critical person, and if I lose them, then, that impacts my organization. They look at it in a selfish way. That happens quite a bit as well, which is, not good nor healthy, right? But I think you always have to, have that dialogue. And then if you see that you hit a brick wall, well, then you have to, look at other alternatives, right? But at least definitely having the conversation, and you'll walk out of that conversation learning a lot about where you stand with that other person, right? Like that conversation is often, even if you don't get what you want, it's very telling. And you get a lot of good information from it. So I think don't be afraid to have that dialogue. Like that dialogue is important. And let's see.
I have to tell you, I'm like loving this conversation just for my own personal, because a lot of the things you're saying are so validating too, with just how I try to navigate my own career, but then also the people that I mentor, because I think it's so important to ask. Like I always share, if your people leader doesn't know what you're looking for, how can you expect them to know? It's not fair to be frustrated with them if you haven't vocalized that. If you've vocalized, if you've had conversations, if you've asked for continuous feedback, and you're still not necessarily making headroads where you'd like to see, then think about what else might be next. Like, are there different avenues? Are there different approaches? But it's very much a two-way street. And I think long gone are the days where your people manager is just going to promote you every 2 years or whatever. That's not how business works.
No, not at all.
That's just not the way that it goes. So it's important to have those discussions, and also, own your own book of business. This is your career.
That's right.
What do you want? What's going to inspire you? Who's going to be your network? Here's what works well, because I think there's also that line of transparency where not everything is going to be a win.
No,
you are not going to have an A+ day every day, and that's okay, because you're a human. And I'm a human, and everyone else is a human. But I think it's so important to fall on that humble sword and be like, here's what I could have done better in this situation, and kind of own your own course correction, because then that leader is going to be like, Isabel's self-aware. I actually haven't thought about that, but she's right. I love that she thought about that. And I know next time it's going to be even better than it was before.
100%, 100%. Like, I think it's much worse to just like, not take that step, to be afraid to fail. Like, definitely, you have to be bold and also think out of the box, right? Like that's where I was in a situation where that organization, we were struggling to make headwinds. And I was like, how can we make this thing viable? And I was also like, at that point, kind of like, if it's not viable, then I don't want to be part of it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to just sit here and like, this is like a, a very good, almost like from a comp perspective, like a highly paid team of people. But like, if we can't get the right credibility, then like I'm out. Like, I don't want to be part of that, which was a big driver for me. Like, we need to be bold. We need to do something. Either this thing flies or we should kill it. Like, we shouldn't just be here like wallowing and not bringing real value to the organization, so.
Yeah.
But like, I again, I think that's important. And then also like sense making, kind of like understanding like what's going on around you, like so that you're not sort of blindsided, right? To like sometimes you get a false sense of security, because you're not asking the questions and you're not really looking a little bit broader to your little piece of the world. And it kind of goes back to that personal board, right? Like it's important to be plugged in. I think early in my career, I was not well plugged in. I was very like heads down and just like doing my job and like, just like, like totally heads down. And I think it's good to not be, to be plugged in, not so plugged in that you're distracted, but, be aware of what's going on in the bigger picture, because that will help. You'll learn a lot, right? And you'll learn a lot about where do I go? What should I do? Does my little world, like, how does it fit into the big picture? So I think those things are important.
And you're right about being heads down, because it's almost like you're not thinking big picture, because what you're thinking is, I just got this job. I am so grateful to be here. I want to prove that I deserve a spot. I want to show, my people leader that they made the right decision. And so you're just go, go, go. And it's really interesting, because whereas all that's true, there's also a way to also know that you earned your seat at the table. Your people leader hired you for a reason. They saw things. So be kind to yourself as you're getting in whatever new role this 100%. May be. And take that time to network within the team and with the partners who you're going to be supporting. And that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that also gets you more. That's how you get those other sponsors, right? Like a sponsor, you have to earn sponsorship. Like, you don't say, "Hey, be my sponsor." Like, that's not how it works, right?
Right. Thank you for your time. I can't wait to see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Isabel. Talk to you later.